On a gray December afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, the world moved past her like she was invisible. Margaret Hayes sat on a weathered park bench beneath a cluster of oaks dressed in Spanish moss, her hands trembling around a styrofoam cup of untouched coffee. She had dressed nicely that morning, a faded lavender blouse, slacks that used to fit better, shoes she hoped no one noticed were cracked, because she believed that sometimes looking the part helped her feel like she belonged somewhere. But nothing helped today. Today marked the 6-month anniversary of the day her husband, Robert, simply didn't wake up. And in the silence that followed his passing, their mortgage collapsed, their savings drained, and Margaret's sense of purpose shattered like glass. She was 56, unemployed, and alone. The park was the only place she could go to escape the echo of an empty house that never stopped arguing with her grief. If you believe in kindness, second chances, or that even broken hearts can find unexpected miracles, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. It truly helps us tell more stories that matter. Margaret closed her eyes, trying not to cry again. She had sworn she wouldn't, not in public. She didn't want pity, she wanted her life back. But grief doesn't care about promises, and soon her tears slid silently down her cheeks, heavy with months of swallowed pain. She didn't notice the 2 little children approach until a small voice broke through her trance. It was a boy, maybe 7, wearing a light blue jacket and shoes with cartoon dinosaurs. His twin sister stood beside him, in a pink coat with crooked buttons and hair that looked like she'd cut it herself. They stared at her with innocent concern, eyes big and curious. Margaret tried to smile, but it came out crooked. She didn't want to scare them away. Before she could speak, the little girl took a brave step forward. Her voice, though tiny, carried a warmth Margaret hadn't felt in months. The child said she looked sad, and that it was okay to cry if she wanted to. She explained that their family came to the park every Sunday after church, and that they always sat on the bench behind her. Then, like an arrow from heaven, the little boy gently placed a small, mittened hand on her shoulder and said the words that would break open Margaret's heart and stitch it back together in the same breath. "Don't cry, ma'am, you can borrow our dad." Margaret's tears returned with a force she didn't expect, but they were different now, less lonely, more like rain after a drought. She had no idea who their father was or what borrowing someone's dad even meant, but the sincerity in those children's voices made her believe, for the first time in months, that she wasn't invisible. The kids introduced themselves as Joshua and Claire, names as sweet as their spirits. They told her their dad was right over there packing up the picnic basket. He was a tall man with kind eyes, brown hair graying at the temples, and a coat the color of forest earth. He looked like someone who worked with his hands, strong, capable, but gentle. He noticed the children pointing and walked over. His name was Aaron Clark, a single father, a carpenter by trade, a man with calloused hands, tired eyes, and a warm smile that didn't feel forced or suspicious. When Margaret tried to apologize for bothering the children or looking distressed, Aaron shook his head softly. He said no apology was needed, that grief had a way of demanding to be seen. His voice sounded like reassurance, like the creak of a front porch on a warm day, familiar even though she'd never heard it before. His kids clung to him as if they didn't want him to go far, but they also nudged him with shy encouragement. Aaron invited Margaret to join them for hot chocolate from a thermos they'd brought. She hesitated, a lifetime of pride and caution telling her she shouldn't accept. But Joshua had already taken her hand, and Claire was tugging at her sleeve, so she did. They sat on a blanket, and the kids talked about school, their favorite cartoons, and how they prayed every night for God to send someone who needed a family so they could share theirs. Margaret felt something shift inside her, like maybe she was the answer to a prayer she had never heard. Over the weeks that followed, Sunday afternoons in the park became sacred. Margaret still struggled. Bills piled up, job applications went unanswered, and the loneliness didn't vanish magically, but she no longer carried everything alone. Aaron helped fix her leaky kitchen sink, refusing payment. He said kindness wasn't a transaction. The twins began calling her Miss Maggie and saved her a seat at every church sermon. They even insisted she sit between them so they could hold both her hands at once. Slowly, Margaret stopped feeling like a guest and more like part of something fragile and precious. Once, at the grocery store, she ran into an old acquaintance who asked where her husband was, a question sharpened by ignorance, not malice. Margaret froze, but before she could crumble, Claire slipped her hand into hers and said they were shopping with their almost grandma. That word, almost, made Margaret's heart race. It felt like being invited into a life she didn't dare hope she could have. She realized she wanted to earn that place, to be someone worth calling family again. Aaron and Margaret found themselves leaning on each other more. They talked about grief. His ex-wife had left when the twins were 3, unable to handle motherhood, disappearing into another life. They talked about faith, not the loud kind that judged, but the quiet kind that held you like a net beneath a fall. They talked about fear, of the future, of failing, of loving again. Margaret didn't know when admiration turned into something warmer, but she felt it creeping into her bones like sunlight unfurling after winter. One afternoon in late spring, Margaret got a phone call she didn't expect. A school in town needed a part-time librarian, someone gentle and patient with children, someone who understood loss and wanted to help kids feel seen. Margaret didn't remember applying, but Aaron admitted, sheepishly, that Claire had told her Sunday school teacher that Miss Maggie needed a miracle. That teacher had recommended Margaret to her sister at the school. Margaret felt overwhelmed, gratitude swelling like a tide. After her first month working there, Margaret saved her paycheck and invited Aaron and the twins to celebrate at a small diner. They sat in a booth sharing fries and laughter when Joshua suddenly stood up and made an announcement to the entire restaurant in the proud voice of a child who has never learned to be shy. He said they had found a grandma, and they wanted everyone to know. The diners clapped. Margaret cried quietly into her napkin, not from sorrow, but from a fullness she never thought she'd feel again. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who might need them. Aaron placed his hand gently over hers. He didn't ask a question, he didn't need to. His eyes said everything. There was room in his life for her, in his children's hearts, maybe even in his own. Margaret squeezed his hand and felt her future shift, align, and open like a sunrise. The twins leaned against her, heads on her shoulders, and she whispered a thank you she meant with her entire soul, to them, to Aaron, to God, and to the strange, tender mercy of being seen by the right people at the right time. Special request. Comment. There is always hope if you believe that family can be found in the most unexpected places. And as they walked out of the diner, 4 shadows stretching across the warm pavement like one, Margaret realized she hadn't borrowed their dad at all. She had been given a family. And she was finally ready to believe she deserved it.